In 1980, a man walked into a Haitian village. He went by the name Clairvius Narcisse, and he claimed that he had died at a local hospital in 1962, 18 years earlier. The hospital had records of his illness and death, and the man even answered intimate questions about his life and his family that, supposedly, only Clairvius could know. The man went on to explain that even though he had died years before, he had been raised from the dead by a Bokor, or Haitian witch. Haiti has long been a hotbed of rumors about the undead. Many Haitians practice voodoo, which is a syncretic religion brought by slaves from West Africa. Voodoo practitioners believe that with magic, a witch can bring dead people back from the grave. In West Africa, the birthplace of voodoo, these people are called Nzumbe. In Haiti, they're called zombies. Hearing Narcisse's story, an anthropologist named Wade Davis decided to investigate. Between 1982 and 84, Davis traveled throughout Haiti investigating the phenomenon and rumors of zombieism. His research eventually became known as the Zombie Project. In his book, The Serpent and the Rainbow, Davis concluded that people weren't really being reanimated from the dead. Rather, they were being poisoned by a cocktail of toxins that included a chemical called tetraditoxin from the putterfish. This chemical was turned into a powder by Haitian Bokors and inhaled by its victims. After inhaling the poison, people would either die or become mostly dead, even being mistaken for deceased and then buried. Within a few days, though, they would reanimate, although barely conscious and looking quite dead. Davis's theory has been challenged and isn't generally accepted by most scientists. Most believe that the stories of zombieism are just stories told by an uncivilized people. Regardless of the explanation, popular Western culture has long been fascinated with the phenomenon of the dead rising from the grave. With stories coming from Haiti and around the world, it did not take long for zombies to become a fixture in our collective Western imagination. Books and comics were written, movies were made. George Romero's classic The Night of the Living Dead brought zombies into the mainstream. The movies also added some of the more famous distinguishing marks of being a zombie. Zombies were no longer people poisoned by putterfish. After Hollywood got a hold of them, zombies became monsters, dripping with blood, missing body limbs, walking slowly but determinedly in the streets, often in packs, groaning and gurgling, wanting nothing more than to eat your brains. Today, zombies have become a ubiquitous cultural fixture. One of the most popular television shows of the past several years is called The Walking Dead. One of the most popular new video games is called Plants vs. Zombies. Even this past June, there was a zombie run at Queenie Park, in which runners had to finish a 5K race without being killed by zombies coming at them from the woods. Zombies are all the rage these days, but with the release of World War Z, the zombie has cemented its place in popular culture. Maybe you've seen World War Z, maybe you haven't. Either way, it's next in the lineup of our current series, Rooftop at the Movies. And during this series, we are reviewing 6 summer blockbusters to see what they have to say about the world that we live in. Movies are a reflection of who we are, what we value, what we believe, what we're afraid of. We're also talking about these movies to see what we have to learn from them. We're humbling ourselves before Hollywood to see if they have anything to teach us about life and faith. If we're open-minded, we'll find that we do. Now, when I first lined up this series, I understandably got some pushback about wanting to include this movie. The concerns were obvious. It's too scary, it's too gross, it's too graphic. It's fine to engage the culture, but do we have to watch zombies take over the world to do it? And I almost backed down because I certainly don't want to gross anybody out, besides which I've never really been a big fan of horror or zombie films. I'm attracted to other genres, like romantic sports movies. Hoosiers, others. But given the cultural popularity of zombies, the movie demands discussion. In less than 2 months, World War Z has already grossed almost $200 million. It's become so popular that the studio has already set a sequel in the works. Zombie media and literature continue to grow. Why? And to our point, what's a follower of Christ to make of this cultural phenomenon? I know it's gross and I know it's violent, but remember, you go to Rooftop, We meet people where they're at here. If we're going to be in the world, engaging the culture, thinking critically about the world we live in, I hate to say it, but we have to talk about zombies. Which brings us back to the movie. The movie stars Brad Pitt and some other people, but mostly Brad Pitt. In the film, Pitt plays the role of Jerry Lane, who is an investigator for the United Nations. Lane is assigned to help investigate the cause of a sudden, worldwide, fast-spreading pandemic that turns normal human beings into vicious, dead-like creatures that spread the unknown virus through biting. When the globe is overrun by zombies and governments fall, Pitt escapes with his family to a UN ship from which global operations are being coordinated. Leaving his family behind, he travels around the globe looking for the cause of the outbreak and hopefully for a solution. The movie is very loosely based on Max Brooks' book, that's a tongue twister, of the same title, which came out several years ago. Brooks' book, as you would expect, is much more sophisticated and much more interesting. What makes the story in the book fascinating isn't the violence, it's not the zombies, but watching how civilization responds to the sudden calamity when all their worst fears are realized. The book is about government ineptitude, it's about the fragile state of civilization, it's about the determination of humanity to survive in even the worst circumstances. That's the book. The movie is mostly about zombies and Brad Pitt. We see Brad Pitt fighting zombies, we see Brad Pitt killing zombies, we see Brad Pitt running from zombies, we even see Brad Pitt escaping zombies on a bicycle. If someone were to ask me what the movie is about, I'd have a hard time not saying zombies and Brad Pitt, but maybe not in that order. That's not to say it's a bad film. Critics generally liked it. The movie has plenty of themes that we'll discuss in a moment, but the movie holds. It's got plenty of heart as Pitt tries to save the world while also trying to save his family on a cell phone. It's a monster movie with zombies, but it's also a political action thriller as the hero travels around the globe looking for solutions. The makeup is fantastic, and on several occasions I imagine just how much fun these actors were having dressing up and acting like zombies. But mostly the movie succeeds for its visual effects. The visual imagery of this movie is haunting, and it reminded me of why we go see movies. We go see movies because we want to see it. We want to be visually overwhelmed by stories we can't even imagine. Michelle and I took our boys to go see it because we're crazy. And I explained to the boys beforehand that anything scary they see on the screen is makeup, it's scary music, it's computer effects, there's nothing to be afraid of. Then, of course, I'm the one screaming like a sissy when a zombie jumps over a bus right at you. Now, the movie is not a religious movie. Just to be clear, the book actually does a much better job discussing the religious themes of a worldwide zombie apocalypse. However, after watching the movie, I walked away with two pretty big questions that I think you and I need to talk about if we want to be culturally engaged Christians. These questions are not related, they are just two random questions related only to the movie, but I think that the answers to these questions can help us as we figure out how to follow Christ in a zombie-filled world. So here are my two questions. The first question is this: why on earth are zombies so popular? I know I overthink things a lot and that some of you get irritated when I do this, but that was the question I walked out of the theater with. Why is our country so obsessed with the undead? What does it say about our world, ourselves, that we have created an entire genre of books, comics, and movies about zombies? And I'm not the only one asking this question. At Comic-Con, the annual convention for comic book and sci-fi fans, there are very frequent zombie panels with zombie experts discussing their rising popularity. Several people have even written scholarly articles about it. Sarah Lauro, a professor at Clemson, wrote her entire dissertation on the rising popularity of the undead. She spent years researching zombie walks. Zombie walks are a relatively new cultural phenomena in which hundreds, if not thousands, of young people gather in urban centers dressed up as zombies. They start in a small number, and then other zombies jump into the zombie mob after being converted to their cause. These zombie walks take place as political action tools designed to raise awareness for various social and political causes, such as protesting the Iraq War or drawing attention to world hunger. What does it say about us as people that we are protesting causes while dressed as zombies? Why are zombies so popular? Now, in reading about that question, I found several theories for the growing popularity. Some of the theories are too simplistic. Many people think, for example, that the popularity of zombies reflects our increasing obsession with blood and gore. Others think that teenage boys are obsessed with zombie violence the way teenage girls are obsessed with the lusty romance of vampires, which are also popular these days, so it's a gender thing. Others think that zombies are a metaphor for the way we're afraid of communists and fascists who want to take over our country. Others think that zombies represent what we are afraid is happening to us as people. Strictly speaking, zombies are former humans that are living but dead. Some wonder if we tell zombie stories because that's what we're afraid of becoming, former humans who are living but dead. As people, many of us have already lost our humanity. We have lost our sense of community and friendship and purpose. We go to jobs, we do meaningless work, then we stare at televisions the rest of the time. We're living but dead. There's probably some truth to all that. Zombies are so popular because authors use the monster to make many different points. But I like what Stephen March wrote in his culture blog with Esquire magazine. His best understanding for the popularity of zombies is that zombies represent our ever-present collective fear of death. This makes sense if you think about it. Lots of people fear death. We're afraid of the unknown, of the decay, of being lost forever. But for the most part, we can set those fears aside and stay busy living our lives. We think we are safe on this side of life. But we know the truth, that death awaits us. Even the author of Ecclesiastes understood this. In Ecclesiastes 3, he writes that there is a time for everything, a season for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die. And later in the book he tells us, all share a common destiny. The righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, the clean and the unclean. The living know they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward. Even the memory of them is forgotten. Everybody dies. Everybody gets forgotten. Death awaits us. We forget this. We tell ourselves it's not real, and we stay busy living our lives, but death awaits. Worse yet, death doesn't just await us. Death is on the march. Death has come out of the grave to find us. And this is what zombies represent, our very realistic fears that we cannot run, we cannot hide. The same fate awaits us all. We watch zombie stories, I think, to try to come to terms with this. That everybody dies and there's nothing we can do about it. We root for the living to beat the dead, hoping that we can do the same. We root for Brad Pitt, get him. But we know that the living never win. In fact, in a surprisingly high number of zombie films, who wins? The dead. You can't stop them. It's kind of like these authors and screenwriters and comic book artists know there are some enemies you can't stop. We can stop aliens. We can stop supervillains. We can stop blobs. But you can't stop the dead. Now, of course, if zombie stories are stories we tell ourselves to confront the persistent reality of death, Christianity tells a different story. If you think about it, there are some parallels between the stories of zombies and the story of Jesus. Those parallels are there because both stories deal with important life or death matters. In both stories, someone comes back from the grave to tell us something important. Zombies come back to tell us that death is coming. Jesus comes back to assure us that death is nothing to be afraid of for his people. We will all die, but then we will all live, and we will all live forever. As the psalmist writes in Psalm 16, "My body will rest secure, because you will not abandon me to the grave, nor will you let your Holy One see decay." And when we raise from the grave at our own resurrection, we will not walk the streets in tattered clothes, filthy from our graves, as Paul says in Corinthians. We will all be changed in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised, imperishable, and we will be changed. For the perishable must clothe itself with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality. When the perishable has been clothed with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality, then the saying that is written will come true. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Our world tells stories of zombies to come to grips with death. We watch zombie movies because we hope that action heroes can save us from death, but they can't. Brad Pitt cannot save us. Only Jesus can save us from death. Only Jesus can save us and give us hope beyond the grave. That's the first question. Why are zombies so popular? And what does it mean for Christians? The second question I thought about after watching the movie is this. How would we handle a zombie apocalypse? Don't you wonder that? Hang with me here. Technically speaking, World War Z is a particular subtrope of zombie movies. There are lots of different types of zombie movies. There are zombie action movies. There are zombie comedies. Some of them are really funny. There are even zombie romance movies. There was a zombie romance movie that came out like 6 months ago. Remember what the name is? Warm Bodies. Yeah, I haven't seen it. It's actually a Romeo and Juliet zombie story. Yeah. Somebody said it's brilliant over there. World War Z is an example of a zombie apocalypse movie, of zombies taking over the world. People like zombie apocalypse movies because we like seeing things on great big scales, and because we like wondering how we would respond in this global catastrophe that affects everybody. As we see in the movies, some people respond well to the apocalypse, some people don't. And I couldn't help wondering how we, the church, would respond to this. In fact, one particular part of the movie practically invites us to consider that. This part of the movie takes place early in the film. I won't spoil anything for you, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you to you. In the book and in the movie, the zombie-producing virus first originates in China, which is one of the reasons it was banned in China, and not the virus, the movie, and spreads quickly into India. The world heard rumors of a fast-spreading virus that produced people that seemed undead. Few of the world's governments decided to do anything, though. They didn't take the threat seriously, and by the time they did, it was too late. They hadn't acted fast enough, except, anybody see it? Israel. As the book and the movie's authors both point out, Israel has faced extinction before. They were almost exterminated in the Holocaust, and since the formation of modern-day Israel, they have lived under the constant threat of war. Israel cannot afford to not take any threat seriously, and over the decades, they have developed a very quick ability to mobilize themselves for action. So, when rumors started of a fast-spreading virus and other countries dithered, Israel acted. They imposed a voluntary quarantine program, building a giant wall around the city of Jerusalem to protect from incursion. And the quarantine wasn't just for Jews, but for Palestinians, Arabs, Israelis, and anybody who could make it to the city. As one of the characters explains at a very key point in the film, every person we save is one less we have to fight. In order to rescue people from the surrounding zombie-ravaged countryside, they had built passages leading into the city. These passages were called salvation gates. They were the way into safety from the apocalypse. You don't have to go to seminary to see the allusions here. Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, has always been a fortress in a world filled with violent pagans. When King David of Israel founded Jerusalem as his capital, he founded the city as a place of safety and refuge. As David writes in Psalm 125, those who trust in the Lord are like Jerusalem, which cannot be shaken, but endures forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people. And the prophet Isaiah writes later that the Lord has established Jerusalem, and in her his afflicted people will find refuge. Jerusalem was Israel's city of security and peace in a violent world of sin and death. Now in the New Testament, the city of Jerusalem becomes a metaphor for the church of Christ. Jerusalem represents the church, and I couldn't help but think about the church after watching this movie, because the reality is that we are living in a zombie apocalypse. No, there are no zombies flying around infecting us with their plague, and the world is not in full-scale collapse. But with a little bit of imagination, you'll realize that the world we live in is a lot closer to that movie than we think. Let zombie be a metaphor for sin. Sin is the curse that separates us from God and corrupts our lives. Sin spreads from one person to another like a virus and disease as my problems become your problems and your problems become somebody else's problems become everybody's problems. Sin turns us from civilized adults into rampaging monsters, which most of us know we kind of are anyway. And let apocalypse refer to the global catastrophe that has resulted from our sin. Let it refer to the conflict, the war, the genocide, the destruction that we watch take place every day on the news. Whether or not we know it, we are living in the zombie apocalypse without the makeup. God understands this, that the world is collapsing as our sin and violence spread. In the Old Testament, he gave the world Jerusalem. It was a fortress of protection from the corruption of the nations. And the New Testament, he gives the world the church. He gives the world us. We are the city that offers people refuge and protection. Jesus himself says, you are the light of the world. You are that city on a hill. That is a thinly veiled reference to the city of Jerusalem, which was built up on a hill for protection. The church is that city. The church is where people flee to for protection from sin and healing from disease. The church is where God's people come together in unity and work to rescue the afflicted who are fleeing to the salvation gates for help. Of course, that's the ideal, but it's not always the reality. When people run to the church to escape the apocalypse, what they find here might not always be that encouraging. When people enter the church for refuge, they sometimes find as much conflict and disease inside the church as they saw outside. The zombies have taken over plenty of churches. I have a friend who was telling me about his church board of elders, the guys that run the place. And I know I was hearing it secondhand, but he was describing some of the meanest, most vindictive, and arrogant people you could ever imagine on his church board. They were zombies. The zombies had taken over his church board. Called this meeting to order. Roar. Any prayer requests? Roar. We don't have any zombies running this church. We have zombies in the church, just not running the place. But I still like the metaphor because it makes me realize what we're up against. I wonder how we would do church if we really believed that the zombie apocalypse was happening. Because it is. The Apostle Peter reminds us, the end of all things is near. That's not a Hollywood phrase. The end of all things is near. Banging on the door. They're coming. The authors of Scripture believed in a great calamitous end to our history filled with violence and destruction, and they also believed that it had already started. We are living in the end times. The end of the world is near, with sin and death taking down more people than we can imagine. Every day, according to statisticians, 155,000 people died yesterday. Sin and death are taking down 155,000 people every day. But so many Christians are blind to the crisis. We do church like some extracurricular activity instead of the desperate rescue mission that it is. I get into a lot of theological arguments with people because that's what we do. And some of these arguments and disagreements are fine, but during some of them I just wonder, humanity is going to hell, and we're sitting here talking about this. It reminded me of something a missionary friend told me years ago. He was working in Africa. I was taking a class about Genesis in seminary at the time, the first book in the Bible, and I asked him if Christians in Africa spent a lot of time debating creation and evolution like we do here in the United States, because that's what we do, right? We debate creation and evolution. And he said, no. Churches in Africa are much busier like saving people who are dying from AIDS. I think about that all the time because they get it. They understand the stakes. They understand we are living in a zombie apocalypse and that sin and disease are eradicating their country. They know that every person they can save is one less they have to fight. They know they don't have time to debate theology, as important as that is. They have to rescue people from death. I wonder what we would do differently if we understood that we too are living in an apocalypse with people dying of sin all around us. What would I do differently? I would argue less. I wouldn't think twice about showing up to church for a good cause. Be less concerned about my money. be less concerned with doing things the right way, be much more intentional talking to my neighbors and friends and family about Jesus, getting them to safety. Because there is only one way to safety in the apocalypse. There's only one salvation gate into the city. It's belief in Christ. It's belief in the power of his blood to cleanse us of our sin and our guilt. This is what we celebrate in communion. Our salvation from the apocalypse by the body and blood of Christ. We feast on the bread of his flesh and the blood in this cup as a reminder of his sacrifice to save us from the apocalypse of God's wrath. The rest of the world is dying from sin all around us. But we here in Jerusalem in the church have found safety by faith. We celebrate communion on the third week of the month here at Rooftop. In a moment, the ushers are going to come forward with the bread and the cup. When you're ready, make your way down the aisle. Take a bit of bread, dip it in the cup, return to your seat. You should also know we practice open communion here at Rooftop, which means that anybody can participate regardless of church home or denomination. Communion is open to all who identify themselves as followers of Christ by the historic definition of that.